Every Tuesday morning felt the same, another disaster waiting in my driveway. My trash can was destroyed again, scattered across the pavement like it had been hit by a truck. But it wasn't wind. It wasn't animals. It was Margaret Vance, our HOA president, driving her white Lexus straight into my trash bin like she was erasing it on purpose. I stood there frozen, staring at the mess-broken plastic. Garbage everywhere, and a smell that hit like punishment. It was the third week in a row, and every time she smiled as if nothing had happened. Neighbors pretended not to see it, but everyone knew exactly who was behind it. That's when I realized this wasn't random, it was targeted, deliberate, and personal. And if she thought I would just clean it up again and stay quiet, she had no idea who she was dealing with, because the next time she came for my trash can, everything was about to change. She had no idea what I installed next, and it would change everything, starting the following Tuesday morning. My name is Daniel Carter, and I didn't move into Oak Ridge Meadows looking for trouble. I moved there as a single father, trying to rebuild a life that had already been broken once. After losing my wife to cancer, every decision I made was about giving my daughter Chloe a stable future, something peaceful, something normal again. The neighborhood looked perfect on paper: clean streets, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes. And an HOA that promised order and safety. At the center of it all was Margaret Vance, the HOA president. She carried herself like she owned every sidewalk she walked on, always polished, always watching, always correcting something that didn't meet her standards. At first, I thought she was just strict, the kind of person who cared too much about rules. But there was something about the way she looked at new families, like she was measuring whether they belong. I didn't know it then, but that quiet, controlled neighborhood wasn't peaceful at all. It was just waiting for someone like her to turn it into something else entirely. But I never expected she would start with something as small as a trash can. And that small detail would slowly turn into a war one never saw coming, especially in a place where rules mattered more than people ever did here anymore. At first, I thought it was random. The first time it happened, I just assumed I had placed the trash can wrong, or maybe the wind had knocked it over during the night. I cleaned it up, annoyed, but not suspicious. The second week, it happened again. Same exact damage. Same mess scattered across the driveway. But this time, something felt off. The can wasn't just knocked over. It looked like it had been hit with force, still. I had to tell myself it was nothing serious, just bad luck repeating itself. But by the third week, there was no denying the pattern anymore. Every Tuesday morning without fail, my trash can was destroyed in the same way, almost like someone had planned it. Down to the timing. That's when Mrs. Henderson from next door quietly called me over. She hesitated before speaking, like she was afraid of being heard. Then she told me she had seen everything from her kitchen window. It wasn't an accident. It was Margaret Vance. She was driving her car straight into my trash can, backing up and doing it again, just to make sure it broke. Hearing that changed everything. Suddenly, every cleanup, every missed hour of work, every bit of stress made sense. It wasn't random anymore. It was intentional, and it was becoming a routine she enjoyed for too much. And what scared me most was realizing she never once thought anyone would ever notice, let alone stop her in time like this again. At that point, it stopped being just about a broken trash can. Margaret Vance didn't just keep destroying it every Tuesday morning. She started turning it into something I was somehow responsible for. A week after, I found out the truth. I came home to a bright orange citation stuck to my front door. Improper waste management causing community disruption. I stood there staring at it, trying to understand how I was being blamed for damage I wasn't even causing. The trash can she had rammed with her own car was now listed as a violation against me. The irony was almost unbelievable, but the fine was very real. Then it escalated again. Another notice arrived the following week, this time with a warning about repeated non-compliance and potential legal action If the issue wasn't corrected, as if I had any control. Over what was happening at 8 a.m. every Tuesday morning, I tried explaining it once during an HOA interaction, but Margaret just smiled politely and told me that rules applied equally to everyone, even if some residents were less careful with their property. That was the moment it started affecting more than just me. My daughter Chloe began avoiding the front yard entirely in the mornings. She'd leave early for school, just to escape the embarrassment of neighbors watching cleanup. After another incident, I could see it weighing on her. The confusion, the frustration, the way she started asking if we had done something wrong. Without realizing it, every cleanup became heavier than the last, not just physically, but mentally. It felt like the entire neighborhood was being trained to believe I was the problem. And the worst part was realizing this wasn't random enforcement anymore. It was targeted, controlled, directed at us specifically. And once I understood that, something inside me shifted completely. Because now, I wasn't just inconvenienced. It was war disguised as rules. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the same thought. This wasn't random. And it wasn't just personal anger. It was structured, intentional, like a system being used against me. So I did something I had never bothered to do before I read the HOA rules from start to finish. At first, it all looked harmless enough: clean lawns, proper waste placement, and neighborhood standards. But the deeper I went, the more I started noticing something strange. The rules were vague in ways that allowed interpretation, and interpretation meant control. So I started comparing notes. I checked my own violations, then quietly looked at other houses on the street. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. The same violations existed everywhere: bins too close, slight curb deviations, and minor infractions that technically applied to almost every home. But only a few people were actually being cited. Always the same names, always the same targets. And mine kept showing up at the top of the list. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules at all. It was about selection. I started documenting everything: dates, times, photos of every incident, every citation, every inconsistency I could find. And the more I collected, the clearer the picture became. Margaret wasn't enforcing the rules. She was using them, targeting specific people while ignoring identical behavior from others. And the strangest part, once you saw the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. It wasn't chaos. It was precision disguised as authority. For the first time, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking differently. Not as a victim, but as someone analyzing a system that clearly had a weak point. And once I understood that weakness, I knew this wasn't something you fix by arguing or complying. This was something you solved. I didn't go into it thinking about revenge. That's not how my mind works. I've always been the kind of person who fixes problems, not feeds them. So I started treating it like an engineering failure. Rather than a personal conflict, every system has a weak point. You just have to find where the pressure is being applied and redirect it somewhere it can't cause damage anymore. The next morning, I drove to Harrison Hardware without telling anyone. The store smelled like dust, steel, and something permanent. I wasn't there to buy anything dramatic or obvious. I needed something that looked completely normal from the outside, but behaved differently under pressure. Something that could take repeated impact without breaking, without moving, without giving anyone the satisfaction of destruction. The clerk asked me what I was working on. I just said ongoing property issue, which wasn't a lie, just not the full truth. I picked up materials slowly, carefully, thinking through weight, resistance, and structure, the same way I used to think about electrical load. Systems on job sites, every piece had a purpose. Every choice had to fit together cleanly. On the drive home, I kept replaying the pattern in my head. Every Tuesday, to a T, the same time, same direction, same behavior. Predictable systems can be countered. That's something most people don't realize. They think chaos is unpredictable. But it's not. Even repeated destruction follows rules. Back home, I didn't start building right away. I studied the space first, the exact spot she always targeted. The angle of approach, the speed, the impact point, everything had a measurable pattern. And patterns can be redirected. What I was building wasn't designed to escalate anything. It was designed to end repetition, to remove the possibility of damage continuing in the same way again. And as I worked through the details in my head, one thing became clear: next Tuesday wasn't going to feel like the others, because this time something would be waiting that she had never accounted for. Next Tuesday, everything would change. Tuesday morning arrived the same way it always did: quiet. Still, almost peaceful. But this time, I wasn't waiting inside, wondering what damage I'd find. I was already there, standing behind the curtain. Watching the street, like I had been all week, the air felt heavier than usual, like something was about to break the pattern completely. Then I heard it. The familiar engine, Margaret Vance's white Lexus, turned the corner exactly on schedule, rolling down the street with the same slow confidence as every Tuesday before, 15 miles per hour, controlled, predictable. Like she was following a script she had never once questioned from my position. I watched her approach the trash can like it was just another routine task. No hesitation, no awareness. Just the same intention she had carried for weeks: hit, reverse, repeat, destroy. But this time, something was different. She didn't know it yet, but the target wasn't the same anymore. The moment her car aligned with the curve, everything seemed to slow down. The distance closed, tire rotation slowed. The front bumper moved forward with the same confidence as before, aimed directly at the bin. Impact came like a thunderclap, but it wasn't the sound anyone expected. There was no scattered plastic, no flying garbage, no satisfying crash of something weak breaking apart. Instead, the sound that followed was deep. Heavy and violent metal meeting something that refused to move. The Lexus jolted instantly. The front end crumpling on contact as if it had hit a wall that didn't exist the day before. The hood buckled. Upward, the bumper folded inward. Glass fractured across the windshield in sharp, frozen lines. And the trash can, it didn't move, not even an inch, because it wasn't just a trash can anymore. It was reinforced, anchored, and built to absorb exactly what she had been doing all along. For the first time in weeks, Margaret Vance's routine had finally broken. The silence after the impact didn't last long. Within minutes, doors started opening all around the neighborhood. People stepped outside, drawn by the sound, watching the scene unfold in disbelief. Margaret sat frozen in her damaged Lexus. The front end completely collapsed, steam rising into the morning air. For once, she wasn't in control of anything. When the police arrived, she was already pointing fingers. She insisted it was a trap, that I had done something illegal, that the trash can was meant to damage her car. Her voice was sharp, desperate, but shaky in a way I had never heard before. That's when Mrs. Henderson stepped forward and showed them the footage week after week of the same routine. Her car, my trash can, the destruction she caused without hesitation. The officer didn't say much at first. He just kept watching. The recordings, his expression slowly changing. The pattern was undeniable. Intentional damage. Repeated over time, captured in full clarity. And just like that, the story she tried to tell started falling apart. In real time, the time the insurance questions began, it was already over. The blame wasn't shifting anymore. It was settling exactly where it belonged. After that day, everything in the neighborhood slowly started to change. Margaret Vance was no longer the one in control. Her authority faded almost overnight, replaced by investigations, paperwork, and silence. The weekly tension that had once defined our mornings simply disappeared. No more citations, no more suspicious rules, no more destruction. She eventually stopped showing up altogether. And for the first time since moving into Oak Ridge Meadows, the street actually felt like home. People started talking again. Kids played outside without hesitation, and even the mornings felt lighter, like the entire neighborhood could finally breathe. At home, things returned to normal too. Chloe stopped rushing out the door in fear and started smiling again over breakfast. The stress that had been sitting in our lives for months slowly dissolved, replaced by something we hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Looking back, it was never really about a trash can. It was about control, boundaries, and what happens when someone underestimates the consequences of their actions. Because sometimes you don't win by fighting harder. You win by building something they can't break anymore. Before you go, I genuinely want to know, what would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have confronted her early, stayed quiet, or tried something completely different? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read every single one, and some of your stories are honestly crazier than the ones I tell here. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor, HOA, or someone who abused their power, share that too, because you're definitely not alone in this. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to HOA Conflicts for more, because there are a lot more real lifestyle stories like this coming soon. Every week, I break down situations where ordinary people end up facing unbelievable conflict and how they handle it. Next time, I'm going to show you a story where a simple parking dispute turned into a full neighborhood investigation that nobody saw coming. You won't want to miss that one.